Norfolk Island in the South Pacific is engaged in its own modern-day mutiny, not against the tyrannical Captain Bligh this time, but the Australian government. Dan Rivers has been to the remote island to hear about trouble in paradise.
It's about as far away as you can get from Britain. A speck of land in the southern Pacific. An island a tenth the size of the Isle of Wight, home to just 1,700 people. But these days, this tiny community is in turmoil. They call it potluck. Everyone brings a pot of food and it's potluck what you eat. It's a great window into Norfolk Island culture. Traditional Pacific dancing, music and politics. And here on Norfolk Island, politics are very, very passionate.
So we've got a stack of winnings to be won from the raffle.
This is a fundraiser to fight recent changes on the island. In July, Australia ended 37 years of self-rule on Norfolk, claiming the island was being mismanaged.
That is totally incorrect, and that is, sure, we had a deficit, but we were still trading. We had a cash flow problem. With a little bit of help, we could have overcome that.
This year, the streets of Burnt Pine Township have been the scene of protests. The Norfolk flag draped over a coffin marked democracy. But to understand this dispute, you need to understand the history of the island. Rebellion is in the blood of Norfolk Islanders. Their mutinous spirit depicted in the film Bounty. This scene vividly shows the violent mutiny involving some of the islanders' ancestors when they seized control of their ship from the tyrannical Captain Bligh.
You'll be quiet or I will run you through. Do it, Christian, kill him! Shut your mouth!
But instead of killing Bligh, the mutineers set him adrift and then sailed to a distant island, Pitcairn, where they hid out. Eventually, their families were offered a new home on Norfolk Island, founding the community that is still there today. Their arrival on Norfolk is commemorated every year when islanders dress up and remember that first landing of settlers on what was until then just a small penal colony. The graves of those first Norfolk Islanders can still be seen today, and their living descendants are also still here. Ernie Christian is Fletcher Christian's direct relation.
I can go back 6 or 7 generations to that headstone and say that is where this is from. That is where I come from.
At the historic building where Norfolk's Parliament used to sit is a protest camp. It's where Ernie spends most of his time with other campaigners
Good morning.
who reject the Australian claim the island was bankrupt and that it had to intervene.
Being a 7th generation from direct descendant of Fletcher Christian, he stood up to the tyranny of Bligh and to save his people and to give his people another life. And I feel I'm standing up to the tyranny of our administrator, Gary Hardgraves, and the federal government of Australia.
Gary Hardgrave is a former talk radio host, now Australia's main representative here.
Oh, it's a lovely place.
Outspoken and hated by the protesters, he lives in the splendour of Government House. The tented camp is at the end of his drive. Politics on Norfolk can get pretty personal.
I mean, in the end, this is not about me. There are those who want to play the man rather than the ball. But at the end of it, they have overstated their own self-importance in this.
What would you say to people who claim that Australia has done this in a very high-handed way
without consultation, one person said Australia's pulled a fast one.
There's been 2 decades of parliamentary inquiries and reports, warnings, shots across the bow, if you like, about all of this. Almost half of the island was at or below the poverty level. So they were without the normal social welfare support mechanisms. So the Australian government reforms are really going to help most people.
Since the end of self-rule, residents can now access the Australian healthcare system. A hospital is being renovated with federal money, but the protesters claim it's only cosmetic and the previous healthcare system was fine. However, not everyone on this divided island agrees with the protesters. Eve Semple runs a framing business. She says her support of the Australian intervention has led to her children being bullied and has provoked fury.
In the last 12 months, there's been a fair amount of anger and in regards to verbal, but also the spitting and the physical violence that's happened in the community. And I don't think it's people don't track you down, but if they see you in a space, they get all angry.
Mike King is a local hotelier who's also been given the cold shoulder for saying the self-government wasn't working.
I have lost some friends. Yes, there have been divisions in the family, not great ones, but divisions nevertheless. Yes, there are rifts which probably won't be healed in my lifetime.
But the protest movement claims most islanders support it. This display highlights last year's referendum, in which 64% voted to retain Norfolk's Legislative Assembly. Australia ignored the result. The picture you get from the people who have contributed to this protest movement is of a small island trying to shrug off the overbearing influence of bureaucrats a long, long way away. A battle for sovereignty. They've even held their own referendum here. Does any of this sound just a little bit familiar? Well, post-Brexit, the people of Norfolk are hoping to capitalise on that similar sense of rebellion on the other side of the world, hoping Britain will intercede in their battle against what they see as Australian colonialism. The protesters invited a cross-party group of British MPs to the island in the hope they'll help the battle for self-rule. Andre Nobbs is a former politician on the island and shows me around the museum, where he says there's physical proof Norfolk Island doesn't belong to Australia.
For me, one of the most important artefacts in this particular museum is the Great Seal. Now, the Great Seal comes about by the Order in Council given in 1856 by Her Majesty Queen Victoria, which in effect made Norfolk the distinct and separate settlement.
So this is literally the stamp of approval from Queen Victoria.
Absolutely.
Separating this island from what was then Tasmania and Australia.
Yes.
It's Australian territory. The sovereignty and territorial status of Norfolk Island has not changed since the 1890s.
It's a battle over history. Ernie and friends liken Australians' attitude to a bloodless genocide, wiping out their heritage by claiming this island was always theirs.
I'm not going to give up. I'm going to fight for my daughter's right to have a home.
And what a home it is, a jewel of an island spoilt only by the argument that's divided its inhabitants. Paradise lost to a bitter row that's likely to last many more years.
Dan Rivers on Norfolk Island. That's all for tonight, but we're back on the 22nd of November, so make sure to join us then for more stories from around the world. For now, from me and the whole team, good night.